All right, so in this section, ultimately we're going to be solving linear inequalities, but before we get there, I've just noticed that students are not so hot at interval notation. So I want to do a quick review of interval notation and how to create that before we get too deep into linear inequalities themselves. So I've got this table set up here. Over here on the left, we've got an example of a solution in set builder notation. Notice that this would be read, the set of all x's such that -2 is less than x is less than 3. So that would be an example of a solution set. So within the set builder notation, you have your inequality, right? And that's what we're going to focus on working with to convert this into interval notation and then line graph notation. Okay, so for this guy, we've got -2 less than x less than 3. We've got a compound inequality. When you're writing your inequality, when you're converting it into interval notation, remember to work from left to right. Always left to right. And another rule, your less than and greater than inequalities correspond to rounded parentheses. Your less than or equal to, greater than or equal to inequalities correspond to square brackets. All right, so in our case, we have -2 strictly less than x, strictly less than 3. We're going to be using rounded parentheses because we've got those less than inequalities. On the left is -2. You can see that -2 is to the left on the number line. 3 is to the right on the number line because it's greater. So make sure you put -2 on the left of your interval, your comma, and then +3 on the right of your interval. And then on your line graph, where you have -2, you're going to mark that with your rounded parenthesis. Where you have +3, rounded parenthesis, and then make sure that you connect those two together. Erase that. Okay, so moving down, now we've got -2 less than x less than or equal to 3. So all that changes is we still have rounded parenthesis at -2. That's our less than. Because we have a less than or equal to symbol at +3, we're going to make that a square bracket. Same thing on our graph. Keep the rounded parenthesis at -2. Change to a square bracket at +3. And make sure that you connect these together. Okay, -2 less than or equal to x less than 3. Now we have our square bracket at -2. That's our less than or equal to sign. Our less than sign was at 3. So we have our rounded parenthesis. And on our line graph, square bracket at -2, rounded parenthesis at +3. Make sure you connect the two together. Next up, -2 less than or equal to x. There's a square bracket. Less than or equal to 3. There's our square bracket. And same thing on our line graph. Okay. Let's clean that up a little bit. All right, so moving forward, now we've got simple inequalities, right? X such that x is less than 3. So sometimes I like to do the line graph first and then go to interval notation. Sometimes that helps me. So on my line graph, you can imagine -infinity way out here to the left and +infinity way out here to the right. So if we're graphing x less than 3, because we have that rounded parenthesis at 3, then I'll graph my arrow pointing out to the left because we want to represent numbers that are less than 3. So 0, negative numbers, those are all to the left of 3. All right, so if we want to translate this into interval notation, we can see that our arrow points all the way to -infinity. So that's what appears on the left-hand side. Going to the right of our graph, we stop at 3. So our interval goes from -infinity on the left to 3 on the right. And I'm using rounded parentheses for both. I'm using rounded parenthesis next to 3 because of that less than inequality. And for my -infinity, we always have rounded parenthesis next to -infinity. And we'll always have a rounded parenthesis next to +infinity as well, because the square bracket represents equaling a value, we can't equal infinity, we can't equal negative infinity, so always rounded parentheses next to those. All right, so x less than or equal to 3. So on my line graph, I've got my square bracket, my arrow pointing to the left. Remember, negative infinity is way out here to the left, so I have negative infinity in the left of my interval, 3 on the right. Always run a parenthesis next to negative infinity, and then I have a square bracket next to 3 because of the less than or equal to sign. All right, x greater than 3, rounded parenthesis at 3, arrow pointing out to the right, rounded parenthesis at 3, and remember that that arrow is pointing out toward infinity, so that goes to the right of our interval. Always rounded parentheses next to any infinity or negative infinity. And all that changes with the final example is square bracket now at positive 3 because of that greater than or equal to symbol. Square bracket at 3. So we still go from 3 to positive infinity in our interval and on our line graph. All right, so if I want to complete this chart here, looking at our interval, inside we've got -4 less than x less than or equal to 1. -4 on the left and 1 on the right. Because -4 has a less than inequality, I have rounded parentheses, or a parenthesis, and then square bracket at positive 1. And I'll match that on my line graph, rounded, -4, square, positive 1, and connect these together. For x less than or equal to 0, I'm going to go ahead and graph my line first and then use that to create my interval. So x less than or equal to 0, less than or equal to means square bracket at 0, and I'm going to draw my line out to the left for numbers less than 0, like my negative numbers. And remember that we're drawing this out toward negative infinity, so negative infinity will appear on the left of my interval, and 0 will appear on the right. Rounded parenthesis next to negative infinity, square bracket next to 0. And for x greater than -3, I'll use a rounded parenthesis at -3, and then my arrow is going out to the right. And remember, I'm drawing this toward positive infinity, so I have -3 on the left, positive infinity on the right, rounded parenthesis next to -3, and rounded next to infinity. All right, so just to recap, which of these that I drew over here, which of these could be valid intervals? So -2 to 5, rounded parentheses all the way around, that could be a valid interval. But 5, -2 couldn't be. 5 would be to the right, and -2 would be to the left on the number line. So that could not be a valid interval. -2, 5 with that square bracket at -2, that looks fine to me. -2 to infinity, that looks fine to me, no problem there. Square bracket, -2 to infinity, that looks fine. And actually, let me see, I can't read my own handwriting. Let me clean these up a little bit. So let me make this one -2 to infinity square bracket. And I'll make this one -2 to infinity rounded parenthesis, because I think that was my intention. Okay, so let's try this again. So -2 to infinity with a square bracket on either side. Oops, this can't work because we can't have a square bracket with positive infinity or negative infinity. This guy down here is fine, square bracket at -2 is fine, and then the infinity is fine as well. And on our number line, -2 on the left and then infinity on the right looks good to me. Over here, negative infinity up to -2, that looks fine. But down here, this one cannot work. Infinity is never going to be in the left of an interval, so we can't have infinity up to -2. We could have negative infinity up to -2, but not infinity, comma, -2.